Hi everyone, Shannon Petrovich with Therapist Talks. I don't generally keep up with the Hollywood goings-on, but when I listened to this audio of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard's argument that came out in February, I knew I wanted to share my thoughts on it. This audio is a rare front row seat to so many of the games and manipulations and other traits of narcissists that we talk about on this station all the time. In this, we can hear really profound examples of gaslighting, devaluing, love bombing, tactics of anger, pressure, bullying, tears, pleading, and all of that combines to create and reinforce trauma bonding. Because all of this is caught on audio, I thought it could be very validating for so many of you who've been through this to hear how crazy making it is, to see how seductive and challenging these circular arguments are to navigate, and to hear how anyone, literally anyone, can get sucked into this type of toxic relationship. The opportunity to talk about these games and tactics with the live examples to refer to just seemed invaluable. So I know this is a bit of a departure from my norm, but I think you'll understand why. I've put the link to the audio down in the description section below, so if you want to listen. I'm not going to use the audio and then add my comments throughout like some people have done because I want you to have the choice of whether to listen or not. Truthfully, it's hard to listen to, and many of you will be very triggered by it. So if you choose to listen, great. If you don't, you can still listen to this, and I'll give you all of the timestamps if you do want to refer back to it. A few things before we jump in. If you have bought into Amber being a victim of domestic violence, please do listen to the full audio, or you're going to think that I'm defending a perpetrator or some such nonsense. Trust me, I've been a therapist for over 30 years. I've worked with countless thousands of victims, and I would never defend a violent man or woman. But from this audio, it's really clear who's the violent one. Of course, I don't know that Johnny was never violent at another time, but up to this point, it's pretty clear that she agrees and admits that she's the perpetrator of all the violence. He is merely trying to get away when she's attacking him. In this audio, we see many narcissistic traits. Notice I said traits. I'm not diagnosing anyone here, and I don't pretend to know everything about their relationship in one audio. So again, I'm sharing this to help show these traits and tactics in action. In the beginning of the audio, we hear Amber railing on Johnny for leaving their arguments. He's getting few words in, but when he does, he says he leaves to prevent or get away from a physical altercation. She responds by saying, "You fight back," and he says that he once pushed her to get her off so he could get away. She doesn't disagree, but instead justifies her violence by saying, "You split, you always split." Initially, we don't know the whole story, and I'm kind of on the fence. On one hand, I always encourage couples to keep their intensity with each other between a 1 and a 5 on a 1 to 10 scale. At any time we're in that 5 to 10 range of anger, frustration, anxiety, fear, or whatever, we flip into our fight, flight, freeze part of our brain, and we're unable to access our higher cortex, where we are reasonable, rational, and we can use good judgment. So it's always best to take a break, take a walk, leave the room, come back to the conversation later. I would have definitely stopped them in the beginning of this conversation and asked what makes him leave. I would want to assess whether he's leaving to keep things on a more even keel, or if he's avoiding some sort of conflict out of lack of commitment, which is what Amber is insinuating. We find out later that he consistently only leaves when she becomes violent. He says she hits him, throws things, screams at him, breaks things, and he leaves to protect himself. And at one point, he also says he doesn't want to lose his temper and get violent towards her. She says she knows she does those things, but then she always adds why it's his fault, and that if he would just do it this way or not do that, that she wouldn't get so mad. This kind of blame shifting is very common in narcissistic relationships, and it's just part of the gaslighting that people do to keep a victim stuck and blaming themselves rather than seeing the truth of what's going on. We also see that her focus is completely on herself, her needs, her wants, her feelings. It's clear that what his feelings are is irrelevant. Her lack of empathy comes throughout. When she says she can't promise she won't get mad again, this is her way of preemptively excusing her bad behavior and setting up for her to continue it well into the future. She adds that he needs to deal with it and fight for her and fight with her. Again, this is a common thread in a narcissistic relationship. The violence is somehow your fault, and it's always made out to be normal, that you have to deal with it. And it also is sort of equated with love, that fighting for and fighting with is, and if I didn't love you so much, I wouldn't still be here trying, that kind of stuff. Her tone with him is always intense, belittling, sarcastic, and badgering. She often then twists the issue into therapist jargon when she says that he gives her no sense of safety or security when he won't fight for her. This twisted logic is not lost on Johnny, and he addresses it with his feelings of lack of safety when she's screaming at him, throwing things at him, and later when he talks about her punching him in the face. When he brings this up, she says this is irrelevant. Throughout the audio, we hear that whenever Johnny shares his emotions or makes a point she can't refute, she disregards what he said and she gaslights him. She often couples this with escalating to yelling and intensity and not backing down. Around the 5-minute mark, her tactics in this pressure to stay no matter what degrades into tears and pleading that she needs to know that he will hold this to the sacredness of their marriage. After a minute's guilt trip and love bombing, she launches again into anger and pressure, adding in a whole lot of belittling and devaluing. This continues to about the 7-minute mark when she tells him she's been forced to be the stronger person. It's easy for him to run away. He is not brave, he's not strong, and he is lazy. Johnny appropriately asks why she wants to be with him if she doesn't like him or trust him. She then goes into another love bombing, but then in less than a minute, she launches back into anger and then gaslights him with, "You wanted the safety and foundation of a marriage," again implying that he has to stay through the fights in order to honor his vows. When he says, "Let's try not to fight," and he admits, "Yeah, at times I don't want to be here and fight this fight anymore," she shifts into cajoling and tears for a minute. And then again around 11 minutes, she launches back into angry justification, validation, and pre-validation for all the fights to come by saying, "It happens," referring to her rage and violence. At times, we see Amber get angry and escalate into what we call attacking from victim mode. An example of this is, "If I'm some bully or some tyrannical person, then maybe you shouldn't be with me." This is her attacking from victim mode. Then she collapses into tearful, "You take me for granted, you never fight for me, you always split." This successfully gets Johnny to placate her and tell her he doesn't take her for granted, he loves her, and he wants to make it work. Around the 13-minute mark, Johnny brings up, "I'm not the one to throw pots and pans and vases." She again responds with, "That's irrelevant." In this, she continues to invalidate his reasons for leaving when she gets out of control. This time he gets clear for a minute and he says, "That is irrational, violent behavior, and a man would want to get out of the area." Her response is, "How does one inform the other?" This again is therapist speak that she's using to confuse and derail his clarity. At around the 16-minute mark, Amber justifies her anger with saying she's just being honest with him. He tells her she wasn't honest with Travis last evening. When he says this, she escalates intensely, using a lot of insults, sarcasm, and derision to get him off this topic. It seems Johnny had called Travis, whoever that was, and told him, "Come up here, please, it's getting violent." Amber mocks him and says, "Oh, Travis, come and save me." This is too much, and Johnny tells her to just go. Of course, she doesn't leave, and they continue. She tries to blast him for calling her a liar, but he comes straight back with, "I watched you lie in front of Travis." She escalates again with, "Go jerk him off then. You don't know what you're talking about. You always latch onto these things." A few minutes later, they are discussing when she punched him. This is at about 18:35, and Johnny says, "You punched me in the face." She gaslights him with a perfect line. She says, "You did not get punched," like it's a passive thing. Then it gets really bizarre when she minimizes her violence and devalues him at the same time. And she's obviously trying to divert from this topic. She says, "Yeah, I was hitting you, but I'm not bitching about it. You are. You're an effing baby. Grow the F up." She in one breath admits that she did start a physical fight, and the next breath she says, "You're a baby and a hypocrite." He holds some ground here, saying he doesn't want to fight and doesn't want to be attacked, and he won't stand for these attacks. She then sees her manipulations are not landing the desired result. She falls back into cajoling, love bombing, and tears. At the 20-minute mark, the badgering stops for a minute, and Johnny asks, "What are you doing?" She says, "Giving you a Xanax in case you need it. Seems like it's worn off." He says, "Yeah, it probably has." This is one of the saddest moments for me to listen to. Johnny has just been standing up for himself for several minutes, confronting her violence, her dishonesty, and in this we hear that she uses drugs to control and placate him too. He accepts this as a loving gesture on her part instead of the obviously manipulative tactic it is. You can hear how he seems numbed out and detached for several minutes. She's trying to medicate away his boundaries and him speaking the truth to her, and this is another horrible tactic I've seen in other narcissistic relationships. Any visible strength is rapidly vanquished with guilt, pressure, drugs, alcohol, berating, violence, or anything that might work to get compliance and control again. As we get the full picture of her toxic control on him, it becomes clearer that her railing on him for splitting is pure control, that she wants him to stay while she badgers, belittles, even assaults him verbally and physically. And these tactics are classic and often the way that arguments that people in abusive relationships stay for so long. There's often that victim-y cry of "you abandoned me" when the abused person tries to get free. When she says "you won't fight for me," that's basically her saying he has to stay put no matter how bad her behavior is. He regains himself a little bit later and again addresses some of her behavior. She falls into tears and says she can change, but then she rapidly clarifies that she can't take the blame. She tries to tell him that his personality has changed, another great tactic. She's struggling to connect with him. Her version of him being so different seems to be that previously he allowed her to fight or to be aggressive and violent. And now, when you always split, you make me feel meaningless. Again, this victim dance continues, and when she says, "When you leave, it makes me feel anxious." Amber goes into more justifications and rationalizations for her rage, saying, "What, I'm not allowed to be upset with you? I can't voice anything? I'm not allowed to be hurt or human?" And he simply says, "Say it nice." Around the 30-minute mark, she escalates again into, "You never admit you're wrong. I'm the bad guy. You're mad at me for being honest with you." Around 32 minutes, he tells her that she was losing her marbles on the plane from Rio. And she says, "Well, I know, but I've gotten better about that, though." He says, "You haven't gotten better. We've had 3 physical fights in the last 2 months." Throughout, we hear cycles of love bombing and devaluing. She is 1 minute telling him how she loves him in this strange, mocking, hateful tone. And in this, we see that she's really more demanding that he sees how much she loves him and even say that she wouldn't act this way that if she didn't love him so much. This is really crazy making and is also a very common narcissistic tactic. She's not acting lovingly at all, and yet she's demanding he notice her love. And this is extreme self-focus, extreme lack of empathy, and extreme inability to see or validate another's emotions. He rightly says, how can you love me if you can't trust me and I'm such a shit? She argues this wedding. She fought for that beautiful wedding and she wants it to mean something. Johnny now admits something that so many of us have fallen into believing. He says, "We got married. I didn't think the fights would stop, but maybe it would curb them a little." So many people fall into the trap of marrying someone or moving in to give that person more security so they'll stop their jealous, controlling behavior. Sadly, as in this case, it only escalates. If someone acts this way in your dating lives, do not think it will get better if you get married. It's like thinking if you get in the water with a shark, it will calm down and be less hungry. Not going to happen. She says, "I want security back. I freak out when you split on me. I won't do it again, I promise." And then she follows it up with "but" and all these other excuses. Again, we see Johnny placating her. He says he loves her, is trying to make this work. He tries to comfort her and say she can trust him and that he is fighting for her. He pleads to get back to some sense of the early days of the relationship. So here's another thing that we all often see, and the sad truth is that the early days in a narcissistic relationship are simply the love bombing, hook and reel, and there's really no getting back to that because there was no foundation of love, only control, manipulation, and abuse. At 37 minutes, Johnny sets a boundary. If things get physical, we have to separate. There can be no physical violence. She says, I can't promise you I'll be perfect. He again sets a boundary. If things get heated, I'll go to my office for an hour. She initially accepts this, but then says, after a few minutes, it gets harder for me. At around 45 minutes, she is back at badgering him with, I'm the one who's always there. I'm the one who won't split. What's to stop you from doing it again? Again, she's pressuring him that no matter how bad her behavior is, he needs to stick around. At 45 minutes and 39 seconds, he sets a solid boundary. If I walk out again, it's rings off, we're divorcing. Amber turns on the tears and promises, I won't explode. But then even at this moment, she has to add if he doesn't walk away, if they do things differently. And then the audio ends. And sure enough, soon after this, there's another violent episode and he leaves, and the ugly divorce ensues. Though we hear him cave and promise to placate her and finally end the circular argument, we also see him set a clear boundary. And I want to point out the wisdom and strength in this boundary. Many times in the midst of a toxic relationship, we're still trying to make it work. And if that's the case, the crucial move is to determine for yourself clear boundaries and then declare them to your partner. You then can see how they respond. If they respect your boundary, then you may have a viable relationship. If they disrespect it, you know you've done everything you can to salvage it and you're done. I could have easily known at this point this boundary would not be respected because we hear Amber excusing her behavior, saying she can't promise, blaming him for her violence, and even when she promises at the very end, there are ifs involved. She never denies that she's been violent, nor does she say that he was violent. In fact, throughout the oath, she never says that he hit her, hurt her, or in any way verbally or physically abused her. This is interesting for many reasons, but the most important for our conversation is why is this audio only now coming out when Johnny could have used it years ago to protect and defend himself from her public attacks and the complete destruction of his career? Why did he protect her and not himself? Why did he promise her parents in another audio not to show her true behaviors to the world? The answer is trauma bonding. He only this year has said that everything he thought was true was a lie. The aspects of trauma bonding we can hear throughout this video are varying her tactics. She pulls him in and then devalues him. She builds him up with praise and says she loves him, and then she calls him really nasty names, degrading him, telling him he's a coward, he's not strong, he's a baby. She hits him where it hurts most, and then she moves on like nothing happened. She tells him he's not trustworthy or safe, which pressures him to stay and make things feel safe for her, which can only be accomplished by being within her controls. With all of this, she manipulates him into isolating from others, staying in the argument when he wants to leave, and undermining his own sense of safety, sanity, and sense of self in order to make her feel safe. Over time, it's clear that he is trauma bonded to her. Though we see at the end, he also has held on to some sense of self and boundaries as he asserts if there's more violence and if he leaves again, it will be the end. When getting free from a narcissistic relationship, people always feel stupid for falling for the abuser's tactics, for staying too long, for blaming themselves, and for not seeing it sooner. In this audio, we hear someone we would think of as smart, capable, good-looking, a catch in anyone's view. Someone who has it all, and he falls for this woman. He falls for her manipulations. He gets sucked into this toxic relationship. He marries her to try to make it better, and he has tremendous struggle getting out. When he does get out, he's treated with the vengeance, gaslighting, and much what everyone fears the most. Her tactics and how he's trying to cope in this audio shows us how dramatic it is to get trauma bonded to somebody and how hard it is to come out of that fog. I did another video called Coming Out of the Fog, Fear, Obligation, and Guilt of a Toxic Relationship. If you've appreciated this video, I hope it was helpful. Hit like, subscribe, share it on your social media, and take really good care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you again soon.